The virgin.
The virgin cow. I was
Yeah.
trying to avoid the term virgin on the podcast. Thank you for popping that bubble.
Yes.
You better believe it. Welcome back to the Hero Nation podcast, guys. The place where entrepreneurs and business owners just like you come to learn tips and tricks to live more epic lives. Today, I'm with Curtis. And Curtis, we're going to be talking to you about something really kind of fun. Now, I know you're not wearing your cowboy hat today, but you went from cowboy to real estate agent. Okay. So I want to know, what was it like moving from the kind of the blue collar industry, the blue collar work environment, into a white collar work environment? How did that work for you?
So I was born and raised in Kansas. I was raised on a ranch. We had horses and cows, and I rodeoed professionally. I'd rodeoed my whole life, and so I didn't transition straight from the cowboy world to real estate. It was a gradual. So I was rodeoing professionally. I got in a car wreck, and then I started working at a call center for a Western company. So I still wore cowboy hat, starch clothes, whole thing. And then when I moved to Oklahoma, I started working for a construction company. And so there, when I originally started, I was doing manual labor. So I was wearing FRs, I was doing all the work. And then transitioned from that more into the office. But still, I was wearing jeans and boots and the whole get up. I remember when I went to interview with the brokerage that I'm at right now, the guy who introduced me to that broker said, yeah, wear nice clothes that day. And so I wore a polo, my nice boots, jeans, and a ball cap. That was me dressing nice. And I'll never forget when I first started, his name is Gary Ashley, him and his wife, I met with them. And they said, well, what do you wear for like really nice clothes? And I said, well, I'll wear starch jeans and boots. And his wife looked at me and was like, no, you can't do that. And her line to me was, if you want to be treated like a professional, you need to dress like a professional. So funny story there, when I went to buy my first pair of dress shoes was actually how I got my first listing. I was at Dillard's, and I'd never owned dress shoes in my life. And there was an older gentleman there who was very well dressed. He didn't work there. But I just walked up to him and I said, man, I need a pair of dress shoes. I've never worn them before. You look like you know how to dress. Like, what's a good, comfortable pair of dress shoes? He said, well, why do you need dress shoes? And I said, well, I got into real estate and I'm supposed to start dressing like a professional now. And he led me and showed me to get my first pair of shoes. And he said, well, have you sold a house before? And I said, no. And he said, well, do you want to? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, we're getting ready to sell our house and we need to buy another one. So if you want to help us sell a house, or if you want to sell a house, we got one for you. That was how I got my first listing.
So do you think that's actually true, though?
Is what true?
The whole, I think it's...
if you dress like a professional?
Yeah.
I think that from where I was at that time, and what I was trying to sell. So I was selling more high-end real estate, and I think that something I've thought about a lot is that when you're first starting out, especially with me, I look young. I look really, really young. And so when I wasn't dressing nice, I looked like a punk kid, honestly. And so if I show up to try to sell a $300,000 house and I look like a punk kid, they're not going to take me seriously. They're not going to respect me until they get to talking to me. But your first opinion, or somebody's first opinion of you really matters, especially in real estate when you're starting and you don't know anybody there and you're trying to get clients. You want people to view you as an expert and a professional. But my view on it, honestly, is that I look forward to the day that I don't have to dress nice ever again. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot, I feel like as you're building your business and as you're building yourself, there's a lot of times that I go places or that people go places that you got to dress nice. And when I look at somebody like Mark Cuban, like he talks about this all the time. that other than Shark Tank, he never wears a suit and tie. He doesn't have to. And he actually talks about this in his book, How to Win at the Sport of Business, where he talks about how his goal was to get to the point that he didn't have to wear a suit and tie anymore. And as he kept growing and kept going and going, it didn't matter what Joe Schmo on the street thought about him. He had enough money, he knew who he was, and he wasn't trying to impress people everywhere he went. And so he was able to just wear whatever he wanted.
So what do you think about when, so I know this is kind of interesting because we're talking about just how you dress, how you present yourself. But, I both understand, but I also slightly disagree in that, now, like, I remember, when I went from being like, I guess for me, right, I was always comfortable being in the dichotomy,
okay,
right, of, for me, I was a musician, but I was a cowboy. I was a classical musician, and I was a cowboy. I wasn't a country western musician, but I was very comfortable playing both roles in tension.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because I've kind of gone through my career and I've been like, I will wear a cowboy hat. I will wear boots. I will wear slacks, instead of jeans.
Yeah.
However, that's where it ends, right? Because there's something, I think there's something actually there in understanding that the way you present yourself, you need to present yourself as everybody else and how everyone expects you to be, or you can present yourself in a manner that actually brands you as yourself.
Yeah. I think it depends on the industry too. I mean, I think that different industries matter a lot. It's like if you are a doctor, you're not going to be able to show up wearing a cowboy hat. I mean, if you're at your doctor's office.
He hasn't been to my doctor.
Yeah. But I think that.
Well, I mean, I understand
that
the
each
idea
industry
of
is really different.
I get that to a certain extent, and yet I don't believe. I think there's actually, this may be just me, but I think there's a great advantage to actually being underestimated when you walk in the room.
Yeah. And your personal brand. Right. I mean, you're like, with you, nobody else can be dressed like you. You stand out. Your personal brand is what you wear. Right. And that works for you. And I think that there's a lot of people that does work for.
Well, it didn't really ever matter what I wore. I always stuck out in the room.
Yeah.
There was no hiding the fact.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm interested in the kind of the psychological change, even at the sense of like traditional masculinity versus intellectual masculinity, right? Kind of going, because like if you're raised in like that cowboy kind of blue collar culture, it's kind of like you're the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
There's this like there's that thing of like even down to your hands, right?
Yeah.
That whole idea of like, a real man because you grab his hand and it's calloused, and
they're a hard worker. They're a hard worker if they got hard hands. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually filming in West Texas back in August, and we were out at a ranch, and when I say the middle of nowhere, I mean it was you hit like Marfa, and then you went to nowhere, and then after you were in nowhere, then you went another 4 hours, and it was like I think it was 5 or 6 boys, like ages 12 and down to I think down to 2.
Okay.
And all little brothers, and they were working out of the ranch, homeschool kind of dudes. Their hands were so hard. They reminded me of like a rancher's hand that was like the 80-year-old ranchers.
Yeah.
They felt like you just grabbed a little lump of rock. Mm-hmm. That's how hard these like I remember like the 5-year-old shook my hand, and I was like, my God, his hand is as rough and as calloused as a rock.
Yeah.
So and so I was like, whoa, that's intense. So coming from that culture, and then going to, it's not about what I can pick up, what I can move, the sweat of my brow, kind of blue collar America job, to more like I'm doing business. How did that affect your identity? How did that affect your, even like in terms of like understanding your masculinity? How did that work?
It honestly was quite a big change and a big difference. I guess like, even my dad owns a body shop and we lived on a ranch. And so it was, my dad is ultra masculine male. He is as manly as they come. And my whole life I've actually kind of struggled with it because, I knew that was what was expected of me, was to be that like more ultra, that male. And I never really was. I did all the stuff. We've hauled hay every year of my life. I worked without gloves on so that my hands would purposely get hard.
Yep. It's like, why do I need sissy gloves? I don't need sissy gloves.
I would rope without a glove. And if anybody's ever team roped, it burns the living crap out of your hand. And so I knew that was something that was expected of me. And I also I was never really that person. I was more, I was always soft-hearted, honestly. I was never that just like really hard guy. And so I'd always kind of struggled with that my whole life, was just kind of going back and forth of like, I know that I should want to be more manly, even though I'm doing it. Like I didn't, and that's not really even the best way to put it. It was more of like.
So did you kind of put on a show in some of like when you're like, doing some of the rodeo stuff? Was that kind of?
No, I loved it. No, that was
not in the sense of like, did you? Because more in the sense of, did you kind of put on a show of just kind of being a little bit more hard to be inside that culture? Because like in the rodeo culture, if anyone's ever been around it, like it's definitely more of it is a man's culture, and there's a whole lot of emotions and everything else that kind of get shut off.
Oh yeah. And I don't think I really ever like actually thought about it at that time. It was just kind of like what we did. So it was just kind of how you acted and who you were. But I know that, not only about dressing, but about your hands is a really huge thing. I remember my dad making comments about, my God, your hands are soft now. Like, which that's like the biggest, that's a huge insult. But it was, it is what it is. And I guess what's kind of hard for me now was looking back on it. I know one thing that really changed for me was when I was rodeoing. If you rodeo, you're a glorified carny, really. You are gone all the time. You live on the road. You're home about maybe a third of the year. And there's not a lot of money in it. It's the only professional sport that you don't get paid unless you win. And you pay your own fees. You pay for everything. And if you don't win, you don't.
Did you have that realization before or after you left?
No. So my realization was about, because it's so expensive, those guys are always looking for sponsors. They're always looking for guys that have a lot of money, that love rodeo, that want to give them money for lessons. Or, there's guys that just give them money just because, hey, put my patch on your shirt. It's tax write-off for me. Right. And so as I kind of climbed up those ranks, there was a lot of like, you're looking for a money guy. And that was something that was talked about a lot. Like, oh, he's his money guy. That's his money guy. And so as I was going through that, I realized one day that I was like, man, instead of looking for a money guy, I want to be the money guy. Like, how do you get to be the money guy? Like, how does that happen? Right. And so I got around, there was a few people that I got to be around that were very wealthy, and it wasn't I never got anything from them, and I don't know if anybody got anything from them or not, but I learned a lot from them about how they thought differently. So for example, instead of, what would happen a lot is you would win a lot of money, and then you would go pay off your back debts. You would go to a really nice restaurant that night, and you may go buy new clothes or go buy a new saddle or whatever you needed. But it was like, once you got money, you're going to spend it. And so I remember being around somebody that was talking about how every dollar he makes is his little soldier. And that's what he called him. He said, they're my little soldiers, and they go out to make me more little soldiers.
That's the guy from Shark Tank.
Oh, is that what he says?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the bald guy. I forgot.
Kevin O'Leary?
Yeah. It's
okay.
So that's Kevin O'Leary. You used to say that stuff.
And so I remember thinking, I heard him say that, and I wasn't really even involved in the conversation, and that stuck with me. And I remember just constantly thinking about that of like, well, how do you make your money make more money for you? And so then I got to thinking about, like, I would go buy hay in Kansas because I could buy it a lot cheaper in Kansas. So I would buy hay in Kansas for $3.25 a bale. I'd haul it back down to Texas, and I could sell it for $6 a bale. And I realized, oh, that's my money being a little soldier for me, because I was spending it here and it was doubling. And that got me thinking more along the lines of like, okay, instead of me just using my hands to provide or make whatever money I have, there's other ways that I can make money. And that was really what kind of changed it for me, was trying to figure out how to make money with my money.
Was your family like super entrepreneurial kind of growing up, or no?
Actually, yeah. My grandpa owned on my dad's side, my grandpa owns his own business. My dad owns his own business. My mom owns her own accounting firm. But it was more of business owner, not entrepreneur. Does that make sense? So it was more of like, they own a business and they still work in that business every day.
So they're working for the business,
exactly,
and not actually making money from it.
Yeah. And the switch for me was thinking of, how do I own a business that I don't have a job? I don't want a job. I want to own a business, not have a job. And that's what we've been working for a long time. And it's finally starting to become a reality. And even as it's become a reality, it's even harder, because I think that there's a lot of people that are either at that point or could be at that point. But once you get there, you can't have the control anymore. Right. You don't get to control the system, or you don't get to control the people. You don't get to control exactly how it happens. You can only control the system and the process. And actually, Alyssa has really pushed that on me a lot, because there's been a few things that, as I needed to give them up, I was like, well, wait, I have to control that. I mean, if I can't control that, how do I do this? And I've learned that I can control that by controlling the system and making sure that system is perfected. But that's a completely different mindset than most of the blue collar, type of way of life. It's, in that way of thinking, it's more of like, how much money per hour can I make? How many things can I do? It's not about like, what can I get, as far as business goes.
I don't know if I agree with that on the blue collar system. So like, one of the things my father, did for us was that, I think when we were 6 or 7, he gave us each one cow. Okay. He gave us a heifer, right? So heifer is a female cow that has not had a calf yet. Mm-hmm. It's normally, it's in the teen years. Yeah. Not quite ready.
It's a virgin. It's a virgin.
It's a virgin cow. Yeah. I was trying to avoid the term virgin on the podcast. Thank you for popping that bubble.
Yes.
I could have gone my whole life without saying virgin on this podcast. But now we're going to say it a lot.
Yes. Let's do it.
But he gave each one of us, because I have 3 brothers, and he gave each one of us a heifer. And he's like, all right, so now you have choices. All right, so now you can sell this heifer when it gets to weight. You can go get a bull and breed. Mm-hmm. You can set that calf aside. What are you going to do? This cow needs hay. It needs feed. Congratulations, you better go find a job so you can pay for it. Yeah. So it's basically creating these like investment scenarios.
Yeah.
and like from very early on. And so for my brain was always like how do I make some more money? So one of my first job, I was other than working for my father, was at the cattle auction barn.
That's not a fun job.
That is not a fun job. That is a
barn.
horrible job. But I was working back in there, and the first thing I saw was that like in some of these auction barns, they have like a little cafe, like hooked into them, and all these boys, you're getting paid $7-8 an hour, tops, because it's agricultural, so you can pay underneath the minimum wage, and on top of that, we were all like 13, 14, and as long as no one got hurt, which people did get hurt, no one really cared how young these guys started. So we were working, and I remember like watching all these boys, they'd work 4 or 5 hours in the in the heat and the dust and everything else, and then they'd go buy themselves a hamburger and a Coke from Opie's Cow Palace, and I'd be like, hell, they went like their entire like salary off of that. So I was like, you know what? I think I went and bought a cooler. I went to the owner of the auction barn. I'm like, I'm gonna start selling stuff in the back, and he's like, okay, sure. I'm like, do you need a kickback? And he's like, no, I don't care. And so I started selling Cokes, and I started figuring out like which Cokes each one of the okay, the Dr. Peppers sell about this much, the Sprite. So I went to Sam's and started buying these like these like Cokes and things. I was like, all right, it's 25 cents, and like, all right, so I'm actually spending only 7 cents on per can, so that I make 25 cents. All right, here's what I'm making, and if and I started doing like these like little tricks in my head, always constantly like. I didn't think of it as entrepreneurship or business. I was just always thinking like, oh, it's just like a little side deal. I'm going to make some more money on. But I was actually super grateful, like growing up on now when I look back on like cattle and investing, I'm like, my brain is like totally, that was how I learned it.
Yeah.
So when you kind of like realize the difference in between, going from a job to investing, what was your first step into that kind of like greater understanding of how money works?
So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and at that time, I owned a home. It was a mobile home on 4 acres, and I owned this home out of a complete weird thing. There's a lady that I'd worked with who had told me about a house, and she had the house and she just needed to sell it quick. And this was in 2008. And I had asked, well, like, how much is it? And she's like, I think it's like 60,000.
For the
4 acres and a house and a barn. It was fenced and everything. And I didn't know anything about real estate, but I thought, holy shit, that sounds like a really good deal. And so I went in the next day to every little bank in Decatur, Texas, asking for a loan. And I had never had a credit card. I had no money to my name. And so I couldn't get a loan. But there was an old man who was the president of this bank, and he said, look, I will give you a personal loan. And so, like, I believe in you. You need to start banking with us. So it was 2.4%.
That's not bad.
Because what we ended up doing was between a CD I had and a CD my parents had, it was a CD secured loan, basically. So they can only charge 2 points over what the CD is making. The CDs don't make anything. So basically, I ended up getting this house, and my payment was $424 a month. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I read it, and I'd been thinking, like, man, I wish I had an asset. Man, yeah, I mean, I got to have an asset. And then one day I was driving home, and I thought, holy shit, my house is an asset. And so really, we put it up for rent, and I rented out for $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And I realized really quick, like, oh, shit, that's what I need to do. And so when I'd moved up here, we sold that. And then I got my real estate license really kind of on a joke. And also because I wanted to buy more rental houses. And so I had no idea that people made a living selling real estate. I didn't know how to do that. I had no intention to do that. I got my license for investing, and just so happened that I learned how to sell too. So yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad was really what changed my philosophy on money and business and everything altogether.
So when you kind of look back at where you came from, okay, and if you could teach anyone one skill, okay, or a mindset, if you could teach people a mindset that would help them kind of move in from kind of a job mentality to an investor mentality, what would it be?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think that it goes back to there's a Bold Law, and it's a Zig Ziglar book where he talks about be, do, have. And so you can't do something or have something until you've already become it. And our business grows to the extent that we do. And so in anything in life, you have to become that person first. And so I feel like if I could go back and like teach myself something or teach somebody else something, it would be number one, to see yourself as more than just an $8 an hour worker. To see yourself as more than just getting by. To basically expand people's minds to know that they can be more than what they are right now. And I think that once people get the grasp that they can be more and how to grow to be more, that's what puts you on that path that you're going to have it and that you're going to actually do those things. Because I know from my own experience, before I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I had never heard of that. I would never have thought that way. But I know that even though I'd read that book, I didn't ever do anything with it until I had saw myself as somebody who could do that. And I think a lot of people get trapped in that mindset of like, oh shit, it's just always been this way. It is what it is. You know, my mama got by, my dad just got by, my grandpa just got by. I'm just always going to get by. And that's not true. And I think that once people can see themselves as being more, that's when they're going to start doing more and having more.
So starting with the mindset that I actually can do something different, which is a hard thing because like normally people can't really envision themselves actually making more than double what they make currently. Yeah,
I mean, my goal, I remember before I'd gotten into real estate, I had went to this like a weekend thing, and we had to write down our 5 goals. It was like a young men's retreat thing, and we had to write down our 5 goals that we wanted to accomplish by the time we were 30. And I wrote down that I wanted to make $100,000 in a year by the time I was 30. And I mean, that was like the biggest, if I could do that, I was set for life. And then I made it in 6 months, and I was like, well, shit, where did all that go? I mean, it's gone.
Yeah, you realize like how little $100,000 is in a business.
Yeah.
Like it's really nothing.
Yeah.
It's like not even a drop in the bucket.
And so I think that it was, you know, I could see myself as being somebody who could do that. I started down that path, and then that's what opened my eyes to so much more. And so I think that the only way that you're going to see yourself as that is to fill your mind that you can. And if you can't get around people like that, the best way to do it is to read books and listen to podcasts. And
it's like kind of like reforming your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I have one last question because we got to wrap up.
Okay.
So do you agree then, because you're talking about investing and different stuff like this, and this I'm opening a can of worms, but we're gonna have to shut it quickly.
Okay. You're good.
So it's like woo, and they close it. Do you agree with like the kind of the Dave Ramsey kind of approach of kind of like, you know, we have no debt whatsoever, we just buy everything using cash? Or do you actually believe in like using and basically like leveraging out other people's capital in order to expand your own wealth?
Dave Ramsey helped me a lot at one point in my life. And I think that Dave Ramsey is really good for people, more of like if you're an employee or if you have some really bad issues with you don't handle money very well.
Right.
Right now, right now I still hate debt other than what I'm using as leverage for investment. So if it's debt that I'm going into that is paying me and I have an asset that's guaranteeing that, I don't really view that as debt. That's just leverage.
Right.
If it is going to buy this really crazy expensive car, that's debt, and I don't like that. I mean, I have a car payment, and I'm doing everything I can to pay it off. I mean, I don't have a payment due for 6 months because I'm just like going after as fast as I can. But then when it comes to investing, like in a house, I mean, we'll go get a loan for a house that, I mean, if tomorrow I had to get that money back, I could sell that house and make $30,000 over the top of it or whatever amount.
Right.
I like to think of it as I'm more of a mix between Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki. Because Robert Kiyosaki is all about leverage everything, don't have any savings. I think you should have some savings. I think it's good to have savings. You never know what could happen to you.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that Dave, the thing of not having a credit card and not going in any debt at all, it's not feasible. I mean, I pay for every single trip I have because I use a credit card for everything and pay it off every month. But if you can't pay that off every month, don't go get more credit cards.
Right.
So
yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Kind of my thought.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, guys, I want to know what you think in the comments down below. What are your opinion on virgin cows? I want to know. I really want to know. What are your opinions on money? Dave Ramsey, debt, masculinity, and blue collar versus white collar. I don't really want to read that comment. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're going to do. And today, as in every day, this show, the Hero Nation show, is brought to you by Fuel. If you are not a part of Fuel, you need to be a part of Fuel. Because why? Because Fuel is awesome. Because you get to have conversations like this with people like this on a daily basis. You get to be part of small pods. You get to have pod leaders and be a part of groups that can help leapfrog you forward, condense time, make things actually happen. Guys, go to theheronation.com. Go ahead and sign up. 30-day back guarantee. You're not going to go wrong there. All right, dude. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it. All right.